All right, ladies and gentlemen, the time is 7:50, and the board is now reconvened in open session. We'll now consider action on our closed session items. Do we have any motions? Mrs. Bailey?
Yes, Madam President. I move that the Board of Trustees accept the hearing officer's recommendation concerning the Level 3 employee grievance appeal of Glenn Edens.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bailey and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Do we have any additional motions? Mr. George?
I move that the Board of Trustees assign the Level 3 Employee Grievance Appeal of Francis K. Mitchell to Richard Hightower, who will serve as the Board's designated hearing officer under Board Policy DGBA Local.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. George and a second by Mrs. Bailey. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Do we have any additional motions? Mr. Burdine?
Yes, Madam President. I move that the Board of Trustees accept the hearing officer's recommendation concerning the Level 3 employee grievance appeal of Sharon Kuban, Jacinta Williams, Nancy Turney, and Darlene Brown.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Burdine and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. That concludes our closed session item action list. Next is board member reports. Mrs. Bailey, can you give us the activity report for the past month since our last meeting?
Yes, Madam President. We've been busy again. Attended Austin Parkway Elementary 25th Anniversary Reception, Boots and Badges Gala, Sugarland Imperial Lions Club meeting, Fort Bend Education Gala sponsor party, Fort Bend Cares event, Leadership 101 government session in Austin, Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce Chairman's Ball, Advocacy Institute with National School Board Association, Secondary Science Fair and Awards, District Spelling Bee, State of the Schools, Houston ISD, the Shoah Holocaust event and remembrance at Clements High School, Fort Bend ISD Epicurean event, varsity softball, Clements baseball practice, Fort Bend ISD District swim meet, Teacher of the Year school visits, Settlers Way school visit, and TEA stakeholders meeting for education of children with Down syndrome.
Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. Next, board member special reports.
Thank you, Mrs. James. This past month, on February 1st through February 3rd, Mrs. James, Mrs. Tasson, and myself traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend the National School Board Association's Advocacy Institute. And while we were there, we joined 700 other school board members from around the country and heard from Chairman John Klein, who is steward of the Elementary Secondary Education Act in the House, in addition to Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, who's a member of the House Education and Workforce Committee. The National School Board's Action Center website was launched with advocacy tools. And in addition to that, we attended sessions covering school security, public-private finance partnerships, green schools, attended the opening general session featuring Ann Byrne, president of the National School Board Association, attended a session on a new vision for advocacy and building the better advocate for school board members, a general session on the National School Board's Action Center, presented by Kevin Siak and Michael Zola, General session on politics, policy, and reality with Gwen Ifill. Attended a session on preparing for your Capitol Hill meetings. I know Mrs. Tassan attended a session on legal advocacy to limit federal overreach by the Office of Civil Rights. Attended the Maze of Mistrust, how district politics and crosstalk are stalling efforts to improve education. And also a session on school choices are not equal, what research says about school choice. And on February 3rd, Mrs. James, Mrs. Tasson, and myself called on Senator Cruz's and Senator Cornyn's offices, Congressman Al Green and Congressman Pete Olson, to give them a piece of to lobby on behalf of public education in general, and Fort Bend ISD in particular, with regard to reauthorizing the Elementary Secondary Education Act, requesting full funding for the IDEA grants, and also discussion on child nutrition. While we were there was legislative activity surrounding the Institute, which included the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Chairman Lamar Alexander released his discussion draft for the ESEA reauthorization. And the House Education and Workforce Chairman John Klein introduced his ESEA reauthorization bill, H.R. 5, and I wanted to comment on that just a moment. The Elementary Secondary Education Act, we know today as No Child Left Behind. The new act is going to be called the Student Success Act. One of the key things that we hope will come from this is the elimination of adequate yearly progress. And you may recall that No Child Left Behind was enacted 13 years ago, and each year there were escalating thresholds for student achievement. And because Congress has heretofore been unable to reauthorize that law, each year the threshold grew higher and higher until a couple of years ago it was 100%. That meant 100% of all the students in all the classes in every single school had to pass, and if only one did not, the entire campus would be declared as not having met AYP. Now that was a federal law and a federal accountability measure that confuses most of us because we have state accountability measures and we also have this federal accountability measure. And apparently, the powers that be recognize that if we allow this to go on as it is with a 100% threshold, it's going to be very embarrassing for the United States of America when not one single campus in the entire country can meet AYP. Which is why we had waivers issued and Race to the Top and Common Core and all that. Now, we don't have that in Texas, but we do have a partial waiver. So we're glad that we're able to move away from an accountability measure by waiver to something that's more practical and pragmatic. And we hope that that Student Success Act will pass very shortly. There was a lot of other information presented, and while we were there, we were working pretty hard on that behalf, and I would recommend this to our fellow trustees to perhaps attend next year. It's something I think you would enjoy. As public education continues to encounter challenges, it's important for all school board members to take advantage of opportunities like that to become better informed about federal legislation that impacts our school district in order to remain au courant on those issues. So I'll encourage you all to go next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Thank you for reporting on that. All right, so we are now ready to move on. Do we have any other special, unless we have any other special reports? Ready to move on to our consent agenda, We have items A through N. Are there any that we'd like to take off, or are we ready for a motion on the consent agenda?
Madam President, I would like to move 11N to action.
Okay. So I would now entertain a motion for the consent agenda items A through M.
Madam President, I move to approve the consent agenda 11A through M as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Excuse me.
I actually wanted to move something else off the consent agenda.
All right.
Please, ma'am.
Can you withdraw your motion, Mr. Rice?
With the unanimous consent of the board, I will withdraw my motion if Mr. Rosenthal will withdraw his second.
I'll withdraw my second.
All right. Thank you. With unanimous consent, Mrs. Tossan, which item would you like?
I would like to pull agenda item 11C to action.
All right. Are there any others?
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda items 11A through M with the removal of 11C.
Second.
All right. We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal for consent agenda items 11A and B, and then items 11D through M. Do we have discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, then please vote. Motion passes. I'd like to suggest then we go back to item 11C, which is the additional staffing positions for 2015-16 school year. Do we have a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda item 11C as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan for consent agenda item 11C regarding the staffing positions. Do we have discussion? Mrs. Tossan.
Yeah, at our workshop last week, we had a lot of questions about the talent management consultant. And in the meantime, I know several board members have sent questions and have had some more information provided to us on this position, and I thought it would be helpful to share that with the community in the open meeting. So some of those questions were around the role that this person would play, and timing for the position. I know some of those questions were asked last week as well, and where the funding will come from for this position. Can you guys provide us a little more information on that?
Yes, ma'am. So let me provide a little historical look at this. So I started my position end of August 28th. And fortunately, I was blessed to come in early on a few meetings with the staff, and then also meeting with a few of the board members. And I was gifted with a draft of the core beliefs and commitments. And interestingly, with core beliefs and commitments, you see them in a lot of companies, and they're kind of vanilla. But with this one, it was actually actionable. So as someone coming into an organization, you really start thinking about how do you strategically align your organization to support that. So one of the first things I did when I started here was really look at what the issues were in HR. Then we strategically aligned our organization to support longer-term goals. In addition to that, two of my senior leaders at the time were the only people that had HR experience. Other than that, most of the people that was in HR actually came through the education ranks. So we looked at how do you differentiate your positions where we can attract HR talent, then also meet the needs of the school district. So we made a change to some of the positions. One, we went from coordinators to consultants. And then in the consultant phase, it was really a career map for our organization. So if you look at it, you have specialists, you have advisors, consultant, and senior consultants. And we begin to attract that talent. We also, when you look at strategic alignment and then you're new to an organization, first thing you got to do is take care of the immediate needs. And the immediate needs was really around communication, staffing and compensation, technology solutions for processes, customer service, talent acquisition strategy, timeline issues on hiring, and then onboarding concerns, first data access. So for the first year and a half, that's what we worked on. So we got to a good point. We built some organizational capacity within HR, and just before break, we had our meeting, where we actually had a strategic planning meeting. And we talked about all the quantitative and qualitative data that we were getting in, and then we looked at it from a 5-year kind of lookout. And to this position, we started talking about we really don't have bench strength to support 17% of our leaders that can retire today and 31% of our principals that can retire over the next 5 years. There's really no strategic or succession plan strategy to really make that happen. So we looked at a position as a consultant to really help build that out. But one of the immediate needs, when we were talking about it, was, you know what, we're working on, Beth Martinez is the executive director of talent management. And she was tasked with really helping with the strategic planning, with the feeder and boundary. I think there was a safety and security strategy, also with all the meetings that we held with the community. So she asked for help, and I said, you know what, we really need this position. However, this position can help you in the short term because really you'll be done within the next 6 to 9 months around the strategic planning and then the boundary and feeder pattern. And I said also within this position, it'd be great to provide them with exposure to that type of growth. And then later on, we can really have them focus on our succession planning strategy. So when we talked about it last week, I gave you a very abbreviated version of how we got there. And this time, I just took a little bit more time to kind of explain how we kind of thought about this, and it has evolved over the years. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you. I think that's more thorough than some of the answers we received last week. So just to clarify, it says that the investment is needed to implement the feeder pattern changes, which is work that you expect this consultant to do immediately and perhaps over the next 6 to 9 months. However, there is a plan in place to use this position more fully as a succession planner, you said?
So if you think about succession plan strategy, it's about building pipeline. And when you build pipeline, you have to think about how do you attract top talent? How do you develop that top talent? How do you select them? How do you select internal candidates for this pool? And how do you grow them? Today, we don't have that strategy. Now, I have 2 people in my talent management organization that can really do the work around this. One is the executive director of talent management, who is Beth, and then I have someone that's solely focused on performance management. However, they only can provide a limited amount of time on the succession plan piece. So this consultant will really have a strong focus on that with leadership from Beth.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right. Then please vote on item 11C. Motion passes. We're now to 11N, which are the minutes from the previous meetings. Do I hear a motion, please?
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda 11N as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal.
I would just like it noted in the minutes, I don't think it was, but that meeting on January 22nd, 2015, the called meeting was not recorded.
All right. So is that like a note?
It's an amendment to the addendum to the minutes, just to note that.
All right. We need to have a motion for that, Mr. Morris.
If there's no conflict regarding the request, the board can adopt that correction through unanimous consent.
All right. Is that fine with everyone to have that be a correction that the meeting was not recorded on that date? All right, very well. So we'll make that correction by unanimous consent, and then we're ready to vote now then on the amended minutes, or the corrected minutes. Please vote. Motion passes.
You're going to need this.
Thank you very much. Now we're ready to move on to item 12A, which is Proclamation 2015, the instructional resources.
Madam President, I move to approve action item 12A as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. George. Do we have discussion? Yes, Mrs. Tossan has discussion.
So some of the concerns that I presented last week with regard to the 6th grade social studies book, the Cengage National Geographic, I still have concerns about that. And first of all, I want to tell you guys how much I appreciate you getting the information to us, and we were able to read some of that, I know, over the past week. And my concerns remain. I do appreciate that the one issue I brought up about the adult pen pals is not something that our students will have access to, and so I'm glad to hear that, and I do appreciate that. I did note that one of the comments in the materials that were provided to us stated that you guys felt like that some of the material was presented fairly, and I just disagree with that. As I did look back over it again, and I felt like the way some of the material was presented was not done in a very fair way. I appreciate your comments about, that this is one piece of the curriculum and that it's going to be, teachers can use more than just the textbook, but I continue to be troubled by presenting students with information as if it's fact when it's not fact, or when there's disagreement in the community about it. That is my strongest concern about this textbook. The other, while I'm talking, I'll go ahead and talk about the economics textbook that Mr. Rosenthal talked about last week, and it wasn't something that I brought up last week. It was something that Mr. Rosenthal brought up, and I read the very thorough presentation presented to us by
Mr. Brownson.
Yes, Mr. Brownson. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I appreciated that very much, that he went through and showed what he felt like to be the lack of bias in the textbook, and I appreciated that. My primary concern with that textbook is the fact that it bears Mr. Krugman's name. And I know he's not an author, and it was an adaptation, or at least that's the way it was presented, as if it were an adaptation of some of his, some of his work. My concern with that is that if we use a book in a class that has his name on it, I feel like we are lending credibility to this man's body of work, and I'm not sure it's something we should lend credibility to. So my concern is if we have a student that has to do a project or go and look for some information in the economics, in the subject or the field of economics, and they have a book with his name on it, then that student's going to think, well, he must be an expert, or he must be someone that we are putting out as an expert, someone whose positions we support, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. I don't know what message it is sending if we use a textbook with the man's name on it. And I've done a lot more research since the workshop, and there are a lot of things out there that are a little disturbing. In fact, there was an article written last week in Money Week about him, and it was not a very favorable article. So I understand that he has some controversial positions, and what troubles me is that we are putting this out there to our students as if this man is an expert and as if we support his body of work. And even though the textbook and even Mr. Brownson's own summary said that it didn't support, some of the things that are in the textbook said that there was disagreement, that they didn't support all of it, but it seems to contradict the fact that his name is on the front of the textbook. So that's my concern around that. While the subject matter itself in the textbook may be presented unbiased, I'm concerned about the fact that his name is still associated with it. So that's my concerns.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Additional comments, Mr. Rosenthal?
Okay. I'll start with this one since this is where we left off. Actually, I share that concern, but I found this to be the most biased book passed off as an unbiased piece of literature that I've ever seen. I appreciate Mr. Bronson's replies and responses, but what he was highlighting were basically Milton Friedman's theories. But every time you see one of these yellow blocks, that's the bias. That's the big government knows best. That's all the liberal ideology that has been going on for a long time, that it's indoctrinating our kids. And I will start, actually, I don't really want to go through every one of these things, but I will tell you that the things that are presented in these FYI blocks, they're incredibly biased, and there's basically no citations, no data. It's just opinion. I actually showed this to a colleague of mine at work, and his comment was, looks to me like it's an opinion piece and nothing more. And I agree. We can take this apart if we really want to. You want me to go through all this stuff? Okay.
I don't think it's,
Okay.
if you'd like to, you can, but I don't know that.
I actually have that actually going through this, I spent several hours this weekend going through this. And I actually created a little statement, and it also ties in with with our policy, e.g. local. So let me back up to this one now. I share Ms. Tossan's concerns with this. I think, again, the way they present, especially the chapters on energy and fossil fuels, is incredibly biased. And I also found in here on page 81 perhaps one of the dumbest statements I've ever seen in a book. And I know that's strong language, but this makes zero sense. And just to make sure I wasn't crazy, because I am a geologist, I actually checked in with 3 experts in salt tectonics. I got responses back from 2 of them, and they agreed that this makes no sense. Commercial drilling, first of all, this is in the chapter on the Great Plains. Think wheat, flat. But all of a sudden, they go into talking about the deep water Gulf of Mexico, which is sitting underneath 5,000 to 10,000 feet of water. So I'm not sure what that has to do with the Great Plains. But nonetheless, commercial drilling in the Gulf of Mexico is risky. Oil deposits lie beneath layers of salt that can shift and cause an underwater earthquake. In 2010, human error caused an explosion of a large deep-water drilling structure, resulting in a major oil spill. The spill harmed wildlife and threatened the economy of the region. Okay, it is true that oil deposits lie beneath layers of salt. That's what we chase out in the deep-water Gulf of Mexico and deep-water basins all around the world. But drilling through salt can't cause underwater earthquakes. So why would a book put something that ridiculous and that just infallible? I mean, it makes no sense. Again, it's all biased stuff. And what actually concerns me even more is the fact that I think a lot of what we saw in those textbook reviews, that have been published, that went back to the SBOE, a lot of those concerns were actually with the website. So I don't want really anything to do with National Geographic. So let me just read what I wrote here. And again, this is mainly discussing this item along with our policy, e.g. local, which, as we know, we passed last year. And it was a response to this very same thing that we saw last year. I went on a 20-minute rant last November. And we have charged the district with this policy, which is to create and present material in an unbiased and balanced manner. Again, I want to reiterate, I don't want just my ideas taught. I want everything taught. I want our kids exposed to everything. Okay? So now I will read this. Fort Bend ISD is well known for its diversity among its student population. I believe that policy, e.g. local, should provide for a clear and consistent process to honor diversity of opinion, specifically in the areas of history, science, and economics. I believe that Fort Bend ISD should be an institution that promotes diversity of viewpoints, not simply the ones deemed politically correct or the ones constantly repeated by politicians or the media in propaganda-like fashion. Not only should we promote academic diversity, but we should do it proudly. Unfortunately, at many universities, diversity of thought is no longer tolerated. Alan Dershowitz, a man well to the left of me, states that many of the same people who can correctly insist on greater diversity based on gender, race, and ethnicity seek homogeneity of viewpoints. Do we want to send our students off to college with their minds made up, so sure they know it all? Send them off ready to shout down or turn their backs on others who don't share their foregone conclusions? Foregone conclusions that they got from their opinionated textbooks or FBISD faculty that went unchallenged? I think our students deserve better. I think our students should go out into the world hearing a variety of opinions, even if it requires veering away from the texts, actually I meant to say the TEKS, for a day or two during a semester. We as a board or as a district cannot control what is written in our students' textbooks, but we can control which ones are used. We cannot control the constant drumming of certain stories in the media, but we can make our students aware of other ideas and viewpoints. Policy e.g. local gives this school board the power to hold the district accountable for a process that does just that. The superintendent is instructed to implement systems that provide for the delivery and monitoring of the curriculum in a balanced, unbiased manner. Yet, how is this to be accomplished? I am told that we can't monitor what teachers say in the classroom. It is the duty of this board to, quote, encourage and support the professional staff in efforts to investigate new curricular ideas, develop and improve programs, and evaluate results. So I ask, where are the new instructional materials that are used to combat some of the indoctrination and misinformation contained within these textbooks? Have we thought about guest lecturers, sponsored by individual curriculum departments who could present materials not covered in the text? All I've heard about is that we are training teachers to deal with controversial subjects. Honestly, I don't even know what that means. Who is responsible for finding controversial aspects within our textbooks? Perhaps we need a presentation to evaluate this training, because I don't see how this can ever be enforced or measured. As far as tonight's action, I cannot vote for any of these texts, as we simply have not had enough time to evaluate. I suggest that we delay this vote until administration can more specifically address the concerns brought about in EG Local. I will state for the record, however, that I will vote against the AP Economics and the National Geographic books presented here. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have any additional comments or discussion? Questions, Mrs. Bailey?
I just want to say, well said, Mr. Rosenthal. We did pass a policy for managed curriculum, and we took a lot of time and effort and discussion and training with an outside consultant that we wanted to go towards a managed curriculum. And I guess my question for the board, maybe if you can add on with it too, Ms. James, is do the teachers know we have a managed curriculum and that what there's, it's not a campus-controlled curriculum, it is a district-controlled curriculum? I'm just wondering, has this been communicated to the teachers? We don't really have to go into discussion tonight, but like Mr. Rosenthal said, we have spent a lot of time passing that policy. But Ms. James, what did we go, almost 2 years of training for this, and realized that managed curriculum, especially on a curriculum audit, that we really needed to manage our curriculum. And I guess, do our teachers understand that? I know that the textbooks are just a resource. I mean, I've talked with my kids about this and how often they use their textbooks and other materials. But do the teachers really understand what the board wants?
Last May, Dr. Whitbeck presented the managed curriculum policy to administrators with a directive that it be shared with teachers. We have since developed a Department of School Leadership walkthrough form that is used to ensure that we are indeed utilizing a managed curriculum in addition to principal walkthroughs. As far as the training for providing unbiased curriculum delivery and any of the implications of postponing adoption resource during a TEKS revision period and providing resources in the way of textbooks to our students, I think Ms. Vordakis could probably speak to that training and timelines.
with regard to the timelines and everything that we're operating off of right now, the whole goal of our timeline that we establish with the adoption process is to get us to the point where we have the maximum amount of time to be able to do the alignment to our curriculum, embed any new resources that we adopt and move forward with into our curriculum, secure training for our teacher professional development in the summertime, which starts in June, to be able to work on the online access pieces of the textbooks and the different resources and get those in line, and then be able to deploy the books, order and deploy the books by the beginning of school. So that's the timeline that we're operating off of right now in terms of this whole process. We are one of the earlier districts in the area in terms of making decisions, and it is, again, geared toward being able to do that and stick with that timeline. As they've stated, we have been reinforcing EG local policy through a variety of trainings, both with our administrators and our teachers as well. So that is something that we have been addressing since it was passed by the board last spring.
Can I ask a follow-up? Go ahead, Mrs. Bailey, go ahead. Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question on that? So you mentioned that your timeline on this adoption involves embedding resources into the curriculum. So I assume you did this last year because we had a proclamation last year.
Yes.
And can you describe for us how that went? Are all our resources now embedded? Is that curriculum fully developed in those courses that we did this with last year? Where are we in that process?
Yes, the resources that we adopted under Proclamation 2014 have been embedded into the curriculum areas that were impacted by that particular proclamation. What we do, for example, right now, we have resources. We have our current textbook resources in curriculum units in each of the courses. And what we do when we adopt new resources is pull those out and then align our curriculum or align the new resources within our curriculum. We don't stop and redo our curriculum and make it line up with the textbook. We use the textbook or the new resource and embed it where it appropriately aligns with the TEKS and the unit structures and pacing that we have set up within our district. So it's still very much, we use our curriculum to help pick the resource. We don't let the resource be our curriculum.
Okay. Okay. Well, I spent a little time down at the warehouse this past week after we had this conversation, and so some of the thoughts that Mrs. Bailey suggested went through my mind. Do we have good knowledge of where we want our curriculum to go? Because if we do, and maybe we do in this room, but do we throughout our organization, do the people who were evaluating these textbooks have a real understanding of that? And I'm a math teacher, so I looked at the math books and I thought, okay, well, this to me looks like a little bit of the same old thing. It looks like a lot of problem sets. It looks like and I'm not familiar with the TEKS and the various classes, but I thought, okay, what about these new initiatives we've started, our calculators? Where do these tie in? How do we fit in our iPads? We talk about different types of technology. I didn't see any relation between those textbooks and those other initiatives, those other paths we've started down. I saw a lot of kind of this, what I wrote down or described as sort of the same old thing. And so it made me wonder, like you said, is that because the information hasn't trickled down to the evaluators, or maybe it has, but I'm not sure. I just wasn't sure if that was really valued and appreciated in the way that I think this board is saying we want to do things a little bit differently, and we want to be sure that we're poised to go to the next level in our instruction. And the points you brought up about bias, I took a look at that National Geographic book, and I saw some different things than you saw, but I saw a lot of pictures of elephants, lots of beautiful photographs and all this, and I thought, okay, I see that, and then I see something comparing a picture of elephants in the savannah to oil wells, and you can't even tell where they're located. And I thought, okay, this is confusing to me, and it would be confusing to a student if we're asking them to compare these two things, because we're not giving them enough context to make good judgments. And I know the TEKs talk about, and our testing sources talk about teaching kids to do critical thinking. And so I value that. But when I see a textbook that starts off, maybe global warming is happening in the world, if such and such and such, if such and such and such, if such and such and such, then we can conclude global warming is happening. And I'm thinking, well, that's a hypothesis followed by a whole lot of conjecture and no fact. That's concerning. And I, like you, you found that one? Like you said, Mr. Rosenthal, I didn't spend hours. I spent an hour and a half. But it was concerning to me that just in those few instances, I found things that I was uncomfortable with. And I guess I don't really know the whole process, but I know the next step of this is for you to come back to us and say, please set aside X million dollars for us to buy these materials. And I'm going to have a hard time saying that that's a good idea, because I'm not sure I don't feel confident that we've addressed the concerns of bias. I guess I don't have any evidence of that. I don't know what that evidence is. And I'm concerned that I wouldn't want to tell a student, this is, for lack of a better term, this is the holy grail of economics, or this is the be all end all of Algebra 2. And I just didn't have confidence when I looked at the materials. And I guess the other thing I would say, because I know there's some teachers here, I appreciate the time and energy that you took to evaluate these things, because I know I spent an hour and a half and I didn't, I wasn't able to look through everything. I just kind of spot checked a few things, but I appreciate it takes a lot of time. That being said, I do think there was some discrepancy in how books were evaluated and how long people had books to evaluate them. And, I just heard of a couple of stories of different things, and I'm just not certain that, I just don't know. I don't know. I'm not clear where we are. So I'm kind of rambling now, but does anybody have any other comments?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. James, and I appreciate everyone's comments, but I have a different take on it. And my take is this: as a trustee, I have limited time to delve into the books, which is, I appreciate Mr. Rosenthal being able to do that and look at some of these things, and Mrs. Tassan, and even you, Mrs. James. But I think our teachers and the process that has been put in place here is a solid process, and we should honor that. We should respect that. There may be a couple of books in here that we should take out, perhaps, and review or spend more time with that. But I think to delay a vote or just throw out the whole batch is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I think that we need to be careful in our role as trustees to, while when we say we want to do things differently, I think what we want to do is make sure that all of our kids receive a quality education. Our teachers are the ones that have to do that, along with their parents who make them do their homework. And so I think that we should respect the process that's been put in place here and follow through. If you've got a couple of books like this Krugman book and National Geographic, which I used to consider a really great resource. Of course, that's when I was young and walking uphill to school both ways in the snow, as I've told my children many times. But I think we would do an injustice to our teachers in this process if we just delayed the vote or threw everything out.
Dean?
I'll keep this brief, but through my thoughts or through my observations at looking at these resources briefly, it didn't take me long to have the same types of concerns as Mrs. Tossan, Mr. Rosenthal, Mrs. Bailey, and Mrs. Tossan. So I'll leave it at that. I think enough's been said about that, but I have the same types of concerns, so I just wanted to express my opinion.
Mr. George?
I appreciate especially Mrs. Tassan and Mr. Rosenthal spend a great deal of time, it sounds like, reading the book, and which I confess I didn't do it. And also, I don't consider myself as, in no way, I'm not an expert in selecting book or curriculum, and because of that reason, I kind of echo Mr. Rice was saying. What I'm sitting here and hearing is we are questioning the process, and that's where I have a question for Mr. Dupree. And do you feel confident about the process we put in place, and do you feel confident about the people we put in place to select our books, textbooks? And that's what I like to hear first. And then I come back and tell you what I feel about it.
Yes, sir. I feel absolutely confident in the process because I believe in the teachers that invested hours in evaluating all of these resources.
Okay. And I think when it comes to many issues, I don't consider myself as an expert. I understand certain things very well, but this issue is I'm going to respect the process. And I'm going to respect the people who we selected to do that process. That's my feel about it. Thank you.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Well, I will have to disagree a little bit with a couple of my colleagues. I don't believe that this process is working, especially with respect to our FC local policy. I'm sorry, EG local policy, sorry. Just not. I don't think that something like this would pass, should pass the mustard. Just looking through this, I really want to just give a couple examples. Because lo and behold, guess what's in this book? A whole section on climate change. And how it's real, and again, they throw out these FYI things without any data. They cite one study that says it's not that what does it say? Averting climate change, which good luck. Will somehow will hardly affect our GDP. No data. I mean, this sounds like John Gruber wrote this book too, along with Paul Krugman. I mean. So the process has failed. I believe the process has failed. I believe getting the list of approved books on a Friday before a Monday update, before a Monday workshop, is more evidence of a failed process. So I don't believe this, and I do respect the time. I'm not in the classroom, okay, and maybe in a way. That's a good thing because I could look at these books maybe a little more objectively and see what's in them from a different worldview. But I can't see how they fit into your curriculums. So I'm looking for something completely different. So maybe if we combine those two types of views into the process, maybe it would help in the future. And Mrs. James, you brought up a couple points. One is when you look through the math textbooks, because I did not look through any of those. I think when we had the discussion on the Inspire calculators, I remember hearing that all the new books were going to have all these sections where it shows, here's how to use this calculator in the text. Did you not see any of that or much of that, or?
I didn't see any. I looked for that, but I would be welcome, Ms. Williams, if you'd like to speak to that, where those things were. I was looking primarily at the Algebra 2 books, so go ahead.
Okay, certainly. Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening. As we looked at textbooks, the integration of the graphing calculator technology was a priority, not just for the curriculum staff, but also for our teachers, because they're living out the integration of that technology this year, as you saw in our quarterly report on what we've been working on. We've worked hard to define the appropriate use of that technology, what it looks like from grade 6 all the way up to grade 12. And I can tell you that the textbooks support pedagogy with the graphing calculator. Across the nation, different school districts have different models of calculators, and so you may not find the screenshots of the keystrokes, but you will find sections and units that talk about integration of the calculator. The teacher, what they refer to in the textbook field as the teacher dashboard, has what's called, and I have one of the books right here, it has Texas Instruments, and it details TI 8384 activities, but it also has an online component with TI Inspire activities for each unit where the graphing calculator should be used. So there are units where it's not in there, but it's not even written into our curriculum in those units. So that was a priority with our teachers when we were looking at the resources, even up to the AP Calculus book. The AP Calculus book doesn't designate a brand of calculator, but it designates how a graphing calculator should be used in that content. So I want you to know that was part of our review process. Not every school district is as advanced as we are as far as getting the Inspires yet, so the textbook publishers are serving all, but the use and the pedagogy of the graphing calculator is represented.
Thank you. Do we have any additional discussion? Mrs. Hassan?
I have a question about the process as well. So is part of our process to incorporate, I guess, for the teachers to look for the lack of bias in the textbook materials?
Well, I'll let Susan may speak to that, but I think I would address it in a different way, because I'm going to go back to what's been said on numerous occasions. The textbooks, the resources we're asking you to approve are simply a resource. Our curriculum drives the selection of the resources. I think we'd be hard-pressed to find any textbook that doesn't have a degree of bias in it if you're looking strictly at the book and what's written in the book. So I think that's where we've got to make the strong connection between we have a curriculum that's designed to fulfill the board expectations and policy. It's designed to be taught, and we're teaching teachers to teach it in a way that is unbiased and very balanced. And certainly, some of the things we've heard tonight are very good ideas, guest speakers and things. And I would wager that many of our teachers do that kind of thing, maybe not on a systemic basis as we would like it to become. And certainly the monitoring for bias is not as robust and rigorous as it is going to become as we continue our work in developing our instructional monitoring systems over the next couple of years. But I think the key takeaway in response to your question, Ms. Tassan, is that the curriculum is the driver, not the book. So if we have a curriculum and through the curriculum we link and we bridge it back to a book, to areas that support the curriculum, there's many of them perceived to be bias statements in the books that would be totally overlooked and probably never even utilized because we're bridging directly from our curriculum to the sources in the book that we deem most appropriate to teach the district curriculum.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I appreciate that. And having a daughter in middle school, I will say that she relies heavily on the book. And so while I think that that's good in theory, I'm not sure that it is always actually the way it works. I also know that in a lot of our middle schools, we're flipping the classroom and we're sending our kids home to learn some things out of the textbooks, and then they're going back to the classroom to experience some other things. So if we're doing that kind of thing and our kids have to rely more on the textbook, then I would have some concerns. I don't disagree with you that I think there's a lot of bias in many, if not all, of the books that we're being presented with. I don't disagree with that. I haven't read all of them, so I don't know that for sure, but I would be willing to bet that that's probably true. And I too don't want to discount the process and the amount of hours that you guys put into this kind of thing. But speaking on behalf of parents, And since I am one, and I have 3 in school, and I know the kinds of things that my kids bring home and the kind of conversations we have to have at the dinner table, because there is a lot of bias in the textbooks a lot of times, not necessarily in what's being presented in the classroom, but because they have to rely on the textbooks, the amount of conversations we have to have at my kitchen table are a lot more than I would like to be having. So that's one of the main reasons I bring this up, and it's one of the main reasons that I have a lot of concerns around these 2 books. I just don't, those kinds of conversations should be minimized as much as possible, because we are relying on our kids to get this as unbiased a curriculum as possible as we can in the classroom. So that's why I asked that question. Thank you.
I'll
Dr.
just pick
Dupree?
up on what you said. Because I sent some questions in this week asking about these books and asking about our resources and so forth. And in the answers that I received in writing, and I think everybody got them maybe in the update, one of the paragraphs was in bold. It's talking about K through 12 social studies resources. And it says textbooks, this is in bold, as our foundational resource need to be updated to reflect these key program adjustments as we've moved from TACS to STARS, the reference and the update in the TEKS. Okay, so I hear that, but if we're talking about it as a foundational resource and we're looking at it just in a, over a very short period of time, and we're seeing that it's not aligned with what we're trying to do, and that's unbiased curriculum, I really am struggling with how we can have it both ways. How can it be a foundational resource, and how can it be a supplemental resource? And I guess if I saw the supplemental resources that went with that, or addressed, or were actually the foundational resources with this as a supplemental resource, then I might be more comfortable. But I'm just really struggling with this, and the process. It might be really good. I don't know. I don't know enough about the process to know. But I'm just concerned that we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're saying we're going to be unbiased and we're going to present all these other things, but yet we're saying this is a foundational thing, and this is our main thing, and this is what we're going to focus our classroom time on, or our learning time, and our kids are going to carry it home and study from it and outline it and learn how to write from prompts in it and so forth. And I'm just struggling with that. Mr. Rosendahl.
Well said. Very well said.
Thank you.
And that's part of why that's one of the reasons I say that this is a failed process, is because we're hearing 2 different things, but yet we're not even seeing some of the a large portion of the resources. We're seeing one thing. And so how are we supposed to determine that this policy is being enforced? Because the thing that we're seeing, especially with a book like this, it isn't. And so, here we are. And I'm not sure what to do at this point. I'd certainly like to pull these 2 books from the recommendation at the very least. And I'd be willing to make a motion to do that, but, it depends if everybody's satisfied with the rest of the process and the rest of the resources.
Excuse me. Well, I would support you on that, Mr. Rosenthal. I think that, I know people have concerns about the process, but Ms. Vardakis, how long have we been using this process in Fort Bend ISD?
As far back as 2002.
2002. So in your view, do you think we've got a solid process in place, notwithstanding the selection of the books, but can you tell me a little bit about the process? You have teams of teachers, and how many teachers might review a book, or how do they go about doing that?
Certainly, I can speak to that. Before I do, I want to back us up for a minute and comment on something else. In a few months, we're going to have to do our annual certification that the resources that we use meet 100% of the TEKS. That's something that we're required by the state to do, whether or not we're in a resource adoption or not. We just have to make that annual certification. And that's very important, and that's our curriculum meets 100% of the TEKS. We have our curriculum built out with all of the TEKS that are in each one of the courses. We have units created. We have those units ordered in our pacing that we use throughout each course. So that is separate and apart from the resource adoption. But we know that we need resources to teach that curriculum. And especially with the EG Local policy of managed curriculum, we need some baseline resources, if you will. We need something that would be a factor of equity across the district. We can say that we know that all students have access to this particular resource and that we build from that. Do we have one resource that can serve that purpose for every course or any course in and of itself? No. So now let's layer on the proclamation process. The proclamation process is set up by the state, and it's built in cycles. Typically, it coincides with the time that a course or a program area is undergoing a TEKS revision. For example, math. Math is perfectly aligned with their TEKS revision, and now they're also looking for new resources to help them meet those new TEKS and build the curriculum around the new TEKS. Unfortunately, all of the program areas have not been able to stay with that cycle due to different changes at the state level. Social studies is an example of that. This particular proclamation that includes social studies is right in the middle of a TEKS revision cycle. We got new TEKS in 2010. The next cycle starts in 2020. So we're right in the middle. But as I said in that paragraph, and I'm the author of the paragraph that Mrs. James referenced, the fact that we had new TEKS in 2010, as well as a major assessment shift in our state assessment program, has made it so that we've had to develop curriculum or develop resources that were not there in our old batch of resources once we got a lot of new content added into social studies. So in terms of a process for adopting new resources under a proclamation, and this is when we have a formal proclamation such as 2015, we do use teachers. The EFAA policy says that the final decisions with regard to instructional resources are in the hands of the classroom teacher. And that's why we have so many teachers that have been participating these last 2 Mondays, because they've been part of the process. Every teacher at every campus had the opportunity to review resources and make themselves available or come and attend the vendor showcases that we allowed in the district, as well as events outside of the district. They could go and learn about the resources, they could hear from the vendors, look at the different pieces, the different components, and so forth. Meanwhile, all of this is going on at the state level as well. And the state had teacher committees that were reviewing resources that had been submitted by vendors. In November of last year, the state put out its state-adopted list. The minimum qualifications to be accepted on the state list was that a resource had to meet 50% of the TEKS and cover the ELPS, or the English Language Proficiency Standards, and offer a digital format. So those were the 3 major criteria. 50% of the TEKS, cover the ELPS, and be offered in a digital format. Well, if we're going to have to certify that we have to meet 100% of the TEKS, we want to get toward 100%. And so when the state released its approved list in November, when the State Board of Education finalized its list, the resources that we concentrated on were those that met 100% of the TEKS as ruled by the state. So our process continued. After we had the state board final list, the teacher committees, the teachers at every campus continued reviewing the books. We also had representatives from each grade level and course that met at the district level. So for example, all of the 6th grade teachers met and reviewed the resources that were part of the state approved list. All of the AP economics teachers met, all of the different course areas, the Algebra 1 teachers and so forth, they met. And then from each of those course committees, we had one representative that sat on the district textbook committee. So for example, in math, there was a 9-12 textbook committee, and some of those people are here tonight. For social studies, there was a K-12 social studies. Fine arts, K-12. CTE, for the courses there as well. So we had campus-level committees, we had course-level committees, and then we had the overall district committee. Those committees used rubrics that were developed within the curriculum department to serve as a guide to help review the materials. And I shared one of these as a sample rubric in materials that I sent last week. These rubrics really focus in on those things that we value within our district, including the unbiased and balanced curriculum that we are looking for. Those were things that were specified along with the content treatment in the book, the format of the book, the differentiation strategies that would be available in the book, how were assessment items presented. All of these things were presented in a structured way, and the charge to the teachers was to review those resources using that particular rubric and come to decisions at the campus level and then finally at the district level regarding the ballots. And I think I sent forward some of the ballot information to you as well. So it's a very structured process in terms of looking through the materials, weighing the options that are available to us, and then the teachers finally casting their decisions.
Thank you, Mrs. Vardakis. And, Madam President, I would just like to suggest that we move forward with this, and if Mr. Rosenthal would care to amend the original motion to remove those two books for further review or exclusion, I would second it.
Okay. Are we, any more discussion, or?
Well, we can certainly have discussion, but we can also have an amendment. It's up to you. Would you like to make that motion?
Yeah, I will. So, I move to amend, forgot what number this is.
Instructional materials list.
Right, action 12A, removing the National Geographic, World Cultures and Geography 6th grade, and the Krugman's Economics for AP from the list.
Second.
All right. We have an amendment to our original motion made by Mr. Rosenthal and seconded by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion about that?
I have a quick question. So when we remove these two textbooks, what happened? What is the consequences? How you're going to bring some new textbooks into the picture, or what happened?
Yes, they'll bring new textbooks back.
Okay.
Is
Thank
that,
you. Appreciate it.
is that correct, Dr. Dupree? Is that what would happen?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So do we have discussion? All right. So the amendment is to remove those two books, the 6th grade World Cultures book and the AP Economics book from the list. If there's no more discussion, please vote. So that motion passes. So now we have a instructional materials list as presented, minus those two books. Do we have further discussion?
I'd just like to add one more comment.
Yes, Mr. Rosenthal.
I'm glad we had this discussion. I still think that there's a little bit of a disconnect. Thank you for explaining your process. And again, I do appreciate the process. As someone who kind of maybe started this snowball over a year ago with Pete the Polar Bear, I think that we can improve the process. I think part of it is being able to see more clearly what you're doing on your end as far as providing additional viewpoints, because it does scare me what I see out in the world today, especially when these kids get into universities. The tolerance for other ideas, it just isn't there. and it's starting as early as elementary schools. I mean, I've watched discussions on Facebook with some of these high school kids, and they just know everything, you know? I bet you they couldn't draw a diagram of a well, but they know it all, you know? And it's a constant theme in probably every one of these books, you know? And I bring up fossil fuels because that's near and dear to my heart, but it should be near and dear to everybody's heart, because without it, we wouldn't be here. But there's just constant negative, 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 negative. And I would ask you to look into a video, a DVD. It's called Addicted. And it'd be a great resource, because it really opens your eyes. And so I'd like to see some of those things. I'm serious about bringing in guest lecturers. You could have debates, have one side versus the other. Hold them at our high school auditoriums. I think it'd be a wonderful thing for education in general. I really do. And I think that's something that we could be proud of, you know, because we're promoting diversity of thought. And I think that would set us apart from every other district. I really mean that. And I'd be so proud to see that. And I think as far as this policy goes, I think there's just still some work to be done. And if nothing else has come out of this discussion, I think, you know, I think we see that. And I hope we can work together and strengthen this. And so we all know that our kids are getting balanced educations. And let them do the critical thinking and see what they think makes more sense in whether it's a historical perspective. You know, I brought all that stuff up last year. Economics, science, you know. I mean, math is pretty much math, you know. But so yeah, well, actually, yeah, you ought to look into
Word problems.
you ought to go look into something curriculum called Rethinking Math. Yeah, and then you're right, math. You got a different perspective. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal, for your comments. I have a question, because we brought up about, I think you mentioned EFAA local, which is, and you said that decision of instructional materials is in the hands of the teachers. I think you're referencing that. I think I have the letters of that policy right. So I don't have that policy in front of me. What are you referring to when you talk about that? Are you talking about the day-to-day, what's used day-to-day, or are you talking?
Both, really. The adoption process, but also the day-to-day decision-making about resources to employ whether it's the first-time instruction or a student that may need reteaching or reassessment or differentiation for some sort. The teacher, being the boots on the ground, has the last bit of authority, if you will, in making the determination on those resources. But of course, a lot of our professional development, and especially with EG Local recently, has been talking about best practices for that, not leaving it to chance. Because whether we're talking about a book or something online, a video or a calculator, the main resource that's the most important is still the teacher.
Okay, thank you. I think that's true, because I want to be sure that we're thinking of these things as resources. We're still allowing teachers to use their professional skill, their creativity to teach the subject that they're teaching. But yet that needs to be managed in such a way, as we've discussed tonight, to make sure that we're treating subjects fairly and hearing all sides of it. So I think we've...
And to just piggyback on this, so when I read that example about somehow drilling through salt causes underwater earthquakes, I mean, unless you're a geologist, you know, or a geophysicist or engineer maybe, you're not gonna look at a statement like that and say that's idiotic. Okay, so again, this gets back to that process, you know, and I think it needs to be addressed.
And what you're saying is a teacher isn't going to necessarily know that. They're not going to know that that statement is not scientifically sound.
And if that statement was actually in a geology book where you're talking about salt tectonics, there are places where earthquakes happen because down in the basin, sediments move, and they move on top of salt, because salt is very viscous, it flows. And it can cause earthquakes, but it has nothing to do with drilling, and in the context of commercial drilling is risky and spills and harming wildlife, that sentence doesn't belong there. But again, unless you have a degree in geology or you study it or you're in the business, you wouldn't know that. And so some kid reading that is like, oh my God, we can cause earthquakes. It just sends a bad message, and it's an inaccurate message.
And I'd like just to add on to that, as we're piggybacking off each other, I was actually offended by that because the BP explosion was human error. All right, and there's a lot of things about the BP explosion that teachers don't know about because it was a closed case. So whoever wrote that chapter obviously was not an expert to use that explosion because there was a lot that went on, a lot of people that got sued over a human error.
And that's the second time the BP explosion is in this book. Okay, so yeah.
That goes back to safety. Okay, I want to bring up one other thing that was in the questions, and I guess you were the writer of the answers to some of these. Because another sentence that I underlined in here that maybe you wrote or someone else did. At this time, we do not have quantitative data regarding hard copy versus online textbook use. And this is a question I asked because I know that in some places we're using classroom sets and kids aren't taking books home. Some places kids are taking books home, or it's whatever they want or whatever is requested. And I guess, as I know, the next phase of this is you're going to come back to us and you're going to ask us for money to buy these things. So I would like to know a little bit more about hard copy use, online use. How does that work? Who's using what? Is this campus to campus? Is this, what's going on at the different levels? So that would be my request, is when we're getting to that phase, if you can help us with some of that information, because and maybe it's not even so much that we need to look historically, we need to look directionally at what we're trying to do and where we're headed with it. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But again, to me, this is an issue of managed instruction. If we're doing things in a certain way, yet we have varying practices at different campuses for how we're using books or not using them, or having them in a classroom or not having them, or issuing them to go home, or using the online book or not, if that's varying, then how can we be really expecting the same thing to be going on in all of our whatever subject classroom we're talking about? So I'd just like to know a little bit more about that.
Can I make a couple of quick comments about that?
Sure.
Our decision going forward in the proclamations both last year and this year was to look for a blended model, both digital and print, because we know that, as you said, directionally, we want to have more digital in our classrooms, but we're not there yet to be able to go completely digital. So blended was our preferred format. And then the actual response to your question was more about the timing, to be able to let you know, acknowledge that you asked that, but we just didn't have the data with that quick of a turnaround. But that's something that we can definitely explore and bring forward with
Well, I know what's coming
next.
This isn't my first rodeo, so I know what's coming next. So I'm just suggesting that because, again, if we're doing what we say we're doing, and we're trying to do the same thing everywhere. So if you move from high school X to high school Y, you're basically in the same place. You're doing the same thing, then we should know what we're doing, and it should be easy to define and explore. And my poor trustees are falling asleep. I have some more questions here, but I'll let it go. All right. So we have an amended motion. Are we ready? Do we have any further discussion on this, or are we ready to vote? Mr.
I
Wright?
think we voted on the amendment.
We voted on the amendment, but now we have the original motion.
Correct.
Amended to remove those two particular resources. So we need to vote on the motion as it's been amended. Are we ready to vote? All right, please vote. The motion passes. Now we're on to action item 12B. Thank you very much, ladies. I'm in the wrong board book. 12B is the order of trustee election for May 9th.
Madam President, I move to approve action item 12B as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. The motion passes. Our next item of business is to review future board meeting agenda items. Dr. Dupree.
All right, as you can tell, our next meeting is a little over a month away in March after spring break. So we got a little time off, but we have some full agendas coming up. As you can see, we're going to keep providing every month legislative updates and budget updates. Per your discussion tonight, we're also going to bring for your attention in March a legislative priority resolution for your potential approval. You'll also note that each month beginning in March going forward, we're going to begin having a strategic planning update whereby we will present to you various components of the district plan and our actions to support the goals and objectives that the board has adopted, so we can really start fleshing out the district's strategic plan, and that'll give you a chance to be aware of what we're looking at and provide feedback on that as we move forward. We've also got the annual demographic update scheduled for March, along with a number of possible action items, including professional services, for example, architectural and engineering firms for the 2014 bond program. We're looking at hiring a consultant to assist us with instructional technology planning. Then there's some policy updates coming as well. In April, it's pretty much the same thing. Again, continuing the strategic planning update. We're looking at doing human resources related to strategic planning in March, instructional delivery and monitoring in April, and then in May, digital learning and instructional technology. Most of the other items are routine items that have been on the list for a couple of months, so I won't read all those to you, but of course I'm open to any questions, additions, or concerns you might have about the agenda, planned agendas.
Do we have any questions or comments? Mrs. Tossan.
Just one. And Dr. Dupree, I know you already know about this, but we've exchanged a couple of emails where I've asked for just an update on some of the things we're doing in the area of special education. So I just wanted to see if that's something we can fit in and when you think that might be.
I think it would, my gut says it would be best in April, along with the instructional delivery and monitoring, because that's a key element of what we're doing there, especially related to the task force and the work that we're engaged with Stetson and the consulting they're doing with us on SPED improvements. Mm-hmm.
All right, no other comments or questions? Then we are ready for everyone's favorite motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.